Welcome everyone to Rebel Impact for another video where we talk tactically about Star Wars Destiny. I'm your host, Rebel Gray, and today we're going to talk about the lull that the game is going through right now and how to survive it by exploring alternative formats. So we know that Worlds has passed us by now, and for many competitive players, there's not much to do until a new set drops. Community participation might be down in your area, and generally we could be feeling pretty bored with the game as it is. So let's explore what we can be doing to perhaps make things better for ourselves by talking about a few interesting formats from Magic the Gathering, admittedly, that can actually be tailored to fit Destiny. And I'll have suggestions for how to do that in this video. So Destiny is a small game, and we have small card sets compared to some other CCGs. And we're playing a Star Wars game, which means that there's a good chance we're going to be surrounded by collectors. We might even be one ourselves. I'm certainly one of those. But once you've got your set and you've seen all that the meta has to offer, you might ask, well, what's next? Well, there's limited, but we don't really need cards, so we're less likely to engage in limited formats. And limited then only really becomes popular at a local game store around the release of a new set, at least to the competitive player. And unless the game is growing in your area very quickly, there aren't going to be many players that interested in a limited format to help build their collections. So as a result, you have all these fun formats that really only become viable at the LGS for a very short span of time and only a few times throughout the year. I mean, I don't know how it is at your store, but at mine at least, no one wants to play Draft or Sealed until Way of the Force releases. I don't either. And the last time we actually ran a draft, we gave all but a few legendaries to the guy who had last pick because, I mean, none of us want to take home extra cards for no reason. You know, once we've got our 2 ofs in collection, a 4 of for a couple of the characters, you know, we're kind of good. You know, having extra rares and stuff in the game, we're not going to sell them because they're so cheap, and it's better to just give them to another player to help build a community and hope that that player comes back. However, all that said, people still want to play the game, right? And if Standard and Draft and Sealed are all you have down and no one wants to do those things on a regular basis, well, maybe it's time to get a little creative. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about alternative gameplay formats as well as local community ideas that we can be checking out to revive not only our personal interest in the game, but draw players back into your community simply by piquing their interest with something different. So let's start talking about the solutions to perhaps get things moving again in your local area. We'll be right back. When it comes to a card game, there are always going to be a variety of play structures, and I'm not going to be talking about decks just yet, but rather the way we actually may approach and play the game. And the most common form of play, organized play, that I've seen is the implementation of a local league. And a league is made up of a number of players who are all seeking to attain a goal of some sort. And within the league itself, you can implement a variety of deck and game formats to really be creative and to make even the most competitive players think outside the box. Now, I personally really love the idea of League. It has great potential to revive a local scene through not only those common goals, usually like winning or, you know, other achievements that you might create just sort of ad hoc, or you might plan ahead, like, you know, only resolve range damage dice or kill a character in round 1, stuff like that. But it also has the common goal of bringing people together and having them play one another in the store itself. You see, this is really, really important for a community, okay? If you want new players to feel part of something, you have to encourage the vets to mingle with them a little bit, okay? It's not good enough to just throw them all in a room together and let them sort it out. I mean, that does work if your community isn't just full of assholes or really untalkative folks, of course. But if you give them something to work towards together as a group, then they tend to try to do that as a group because, hey, they're all playing the same game at the end of the day, right? And maybe that common interest is enough to get the conversation going while they're actually playing a game. And League can build community in a way that just your regular old tournaments can't. You know, I think it was Zach Bunn of Team Covenant who said in an episode of the Golden Dice podcast pretty recently that the word tournament can be scary to new players because of the competitive connotation it has, right? The word league, however, feels much more approachable. And I'm paraphrasing that a bit, but that's essentially what he said. And it's very, very correct. And I am more inclined as a competitive player to be drawn to a league of players for my game in these gaps between sets where nothing major is happening because I know that I'm going to go to the store and I'm going to play 2 or 3 games that I need to for my league advancement. And I can reach out to people and say, hey, man, are you coming to the store tonight? Let's get together and do this. And it gives me something else to work towards other than just showing up and hoping other people also just happen to want to play, okay? And you can get really fancy with the league play too. You know, there's so much room to explore that you can create things like custom prize support, those weird achievements. You can rotate the deck format each week or each month. You can restrict gameplay elements. You can create your own ban list. And that's just to name a few things, okay? There are almost endless possibilities when it comes to creating a local league. And finding ideas, it really isn't that far away. I mean, I just threw out a whole bunch, but there's a ton of them. And you can go on the Discords like Knights of Ren and talk to people who are running leagues in their area and see what they do, because there's a lot of stuff going on. And also there's a Covenant Masters that's going to be going on pretty soon. And there's a whole lot of ideas there that Zach and his team have put together to make that league really approachable for people. So again, you can also look at in your local scene, you know, if you're a little more more of a homebody with your store, you can look at the Magic the Gathering group or the Pokemon group or whoever else at a store, see what they're doing. You know, if those games are big in your area, chances are they've also had to survive some lulls, and they have leagues going on throughout the year, and they're finding ways to engage players in a unique and meaningful way. So that's League, and if your local store isn't running one, talk to the owner and offer to put one together. Work out some sort of entry cost and prize support fee, and then work on putting the week-by-week structure together. You can definitely do it with some time and effort, and that may go a long way to helping revive your local scene. All right, so now that we've talked about League and all its possibilities, or I guess some possibilities, I want to discuss a few of the alternate formats that you can play and really incorporate into your league to create a mix-up on a week-to-week basis or a monthly basis. And I know, for a lot of you, you may already know about some of the formats that I'm going to be talking about, but hey, informing the masses here, so, let me do what I do, okay? Keep in mind, however, as we go through these formats, that they can be blended together with the limited formats as you please, okay? And what I mean by blended is that you can take deck formats and play formats and you can smash them together, okay? So you can have league play where one week you're doing a two-headed giant format, and then the next week, you're doing some other kind of format, okay? Or trilogies format, or you're going to do a cube draft that week, okay? And that's going to be the format. So, for example, we're going to talk about Emperor also later, and, you have constructed Emperor, or you can decide to do sealed Emperor style, or a draft Emperor event, something like that. So after we talk about all the pros and cons of each of these, it may be easier to see why making a limited version of a particular deck format might actually be kind of detrimental, and I'm going to highlight that as I go through as well. All right, so first up is the two-headed giant format, or Troig, if you want to make it Star Wars themes. The Troig was the announcers at the Ubuntu Eve race, if you remember from episode 1. You may not, because you've said I've scratched that entire movie from my brain. But the idea that drives this format in Constructed, and it also works in Limited, is that you have 2 players on the same team versus another 2 players on a different team. And each of these teams takes simultaneous turns, and then the other team goes, okay? And a team wins when all their opponent's characters have been eliminated as, per usual. Now, in order to craft this for Destiny, there's a few particulars to consider here too. First, you should determine whether or not players literally take their actions simultaneously, or if they do it in a 1-2 order. So maybe the left player goes first and the right player, or the right player, the left player, and maybe it alternates each round, or maybe you keep it the same, or maybe you just let them choose every round. If you choose this particular 1-2 order go thing, then you have to be careful that your before and after effect timing is executed properly. So for example, maybe my action is to use friends in low places, and my opponent, on my opponent, and my teammate's action is to activate Kylo 2 and call a color. Now, do I take my opponent's cards into my hand and look at them, or does my teammate get access to that too, so that my opponent can just, spread them out as usual, as if it was like a 1v1 game? Determine how you want to handle things like hand knowledge. Personally, I like the 1-2 punch order, as it tends to deal with those timing effects a little bit better, as long as you're all on the same page about how you're executing that. The second thing is that in a typical 2-headed giant game, the players together are presumed to share the maximum copies of cards between their decks, okay? So you couldn't each play 2 copies of Riposte. You can only have 2 copies between you, okay? This is a team event, so perhaps trying to blend this with a limited format isn't great if you keep that particular rule, but if you drop it and go with the regular limited format rules for copies of cards, for which there is no limit, then everything's fine. The third consideration you might throw in is that you can, and if you can muster it on your league night, is to let this format actually be multiplayer. Okay, now there's some really interesting shenanigans that you can add into the format if you do this. Okay, you can just leave it be and let anyone attack anyone else. And in a 3-team game, that's probably fine. In a 4-team game, you might want to add ranges so you can only attack to the left and right, and you know the teams 2 seats from you can't be affected by you. You know, everybody has an effective range of 1, and that sort of makes them allies, right? To have someone across the table in a 4-player game. You know, I think that the crosstalk strategies here make for a really interesting game as well, but also a very long game, and you know, and that's something you got to consider too when you start to talk about multiplayer formats of things. Is that it does extend the length of a game, and that has the the potential of saying, well, I don't get to take my action for a while, so players themselves might lose interest or not pay attention to what's going on. And that can be, a problem too. Also, of course, the complexity of sequencing your turn when you really can't. You have to do a multi-layer predictive, stuff by saying, well, what this guy's going to do and this guy's going to do, it's going to determine perhaps what I'm going to do as well. The fourth and last consideration for this format, to me, would be that once one of the 2 players on a team claims, that entire team's action phase ends. And, I think this adds a good bit of claim tension strategy to the game as well, and keeps the game pretty honest. So this particular consideration is one that I think also extends to all of the deck formats in format-specific games for pretty much any of these different deck formats that you might actually try to implement, because there's something about claiming in Destiny and saying, well, now my opponent gets to do whatever they want, that's supposed to be the trade-off to the advantage of claiming, right? So I think that's a rule that needs to be preserved in this particular format and all the ones we're going to talk about going forward. All right, next up, let's talk a bit about the Emperor format. And I've actually talked about this one on a video a very, very long time ago, back when this channel was in its infancy. But it's a format that's totally worth mentioning again because it's very, very interesting. And the basic premise of Emperor is that you form teams of 3 to face off against another team of 3, and the seating at the table is actually very important. So players of a team sit to the left and right of their team's designated Emperor, and those players have an attack range of 1, which means they can attack the players that are seated directly across from them. The Emperor, on the other hand, has an attack range of 2, so the players to his left and right count as 1, but then the ones across from them count as range of 2. So in order to attack the Emperor of an opposing team, you have to eliminate at least one of the players to his or her left or right. And the limited attack range stuff brings an element of targeting strategies to the game that you don't see in another format, and it also causes the Emperor character themselves to have to make strategic decisions about where things like their damage is going. And what I like a lot about this format is it allows for actual team deck building in a different way than Two-Headed Giant does, because they're sharing cards. In Emperor, they're not sharing the max deck copy card rule. So generally, there aren't any restrictions on actually how to build decks in Emperor. You just play standard constructed decks or limited constructed decks if you'd prefer to do that. But the nuance here is that the Emperor's deck can actually be built in a constructed format for something like heavy aggro or AoE damage to whittle the opponents down quickly with the help of your teammates that are sitting across from that opponent. The Emperor can be then well protected by teammates who might run heavy shield decks, control decks, or what have you. There are a lot of different ways you can set up teams to be really insanely good in Emperor. Now, I haven't played Emperor in months, but the story that I told last time was that when I did, I was playing Pomaz as the Emperor of my team, and I basically had 0 removal in my deck. And my teammates were both playing Qui-Gon shield production decks. This was around Empire at War meta. Anyway, it was pretty much a slaughter for us because my dice couldn't be mitigated because I was, a range of 3 early in the game. So my Poe was basically full force, throwing as much heat as he possibly could. Anyway, that team deck building thing is something I really, really like about the format. Unfortunately, the problem with this format is that it needs a minimum of 6 players to play just one game. So if your community is already pretty low on people, that could be a problem for you. You don't want to get a game going, which takes like they take a really long time, okay, these games. And then you have a 7th player show up and basically be out of the game for, the whole length that you're playing. And he has no one to play, no opponent. So, the other thing with this format is it does not really lend itself well to multiplayer like the Two-Headed Giant does for a lot of the same reasons above. But you can try it if you really want to. So one of the newer and hip formats, which is actually Destiny specific, and that means it does not come from Magic the Gathering, is the solo format. And that's been floating around on Reddit for a little while in the Discords. And after looking over the rules for this format, I have to say I actually quite like it. And I'd love to try a hand at it. I have a solo deck built, but I don't bring it with me because no one's going to play it. But I have it just in case anyone asks. In fact, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to bring this up to my tournament organizer and see what he thinks about it, because I really think that we could do a solo tournament on one of these weird weeks that we play. And it would be really interesting as long as people knew ahead of time to build a deck and what the rules were. And the way that this format works is that you play only a single character, and you can have a plot if you want to. And then the amount of cards in your deck can only be the difference of your character's points and that plot from 30. So if you play Elite Sabine with no plot, then your deck can only be 10 cards, as those 10 cards plus 20 Sabine points equals 30, okay? Furthermore, you can also only have one copy of a card in your deck rather than the normal 2. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're like, these games are going to be weird and they're going to be fast. And that's probably very true. I've actually haven't seen any gameplay of it, but I did read the write-up from Reddit a while back. It was over a month ago before Worlds. And I'm going to link that in the show notes below so that you guys can look through it if you want. And after reviewing those notes, I got to agree that in order for this format to find balance in the long run, it absolutely needs some kind of ban list or restricted list. And, the issue with that is that I think most of the stuff that goes in that list is probably blue, or anything that extends the life of a character, like Second Chance, for example, right? That's kind of like a big no-no. There's also a couple of, within that list that you might consider banning are some big blowout characters, like Palpatine is a big one. Ancient Lightsaber is kind of cheesy because you can recur it constantly, and you get it so fast by putting it at the bottom of your deck because you have such a small deck. And of course, Kylo 2 being ridiculously strong in a format, as well as his Starfighter, because if you're playing one character, you're playing monocolor, right? So Kylo is going to he's going to grow in strength exponentially in a format like this. So on those notes, a couple of things that seem bright about this format's possible future are these. And firstly, if it follows standard format rotation, then a bunch of that stuff will be out by next year, and then the ban list becomes significantly smaller if, not non-existent. And that's assuming you play solo standard. If you play solo infinite after the rotation, well, you're not really solving any of the problems. Of course, the rotation is not going to bump Kylo out, so, or his ship, so, maybe you want to play with half gray cards in your deck all the time in solo format if you don't ban Kylo. As for the cards that shine, Flank works kind of well in a single character format. I think high efficient removal continues to be really amazing. 2-die removal continues to be really good. As for strategies, I think that Mill is probably too good in the format, but Sabine is also good, but she's also balanced by her actual deck size. So indirect damage characters, like the Veteran Stormtrooper has a 9 on it. You would never play that, but anything that has like a 3 indirect damage on it, that really shines, because those indirect damage values are not only higher than the normal direct range damage and melee damage sides, but you're also only ever going to resolve them against one other character, unless they're also playing a bubble shield, right? So think about things like that. That stuff can equate to high focused damage rather than indirect. And that was also mentioned in that post, and I think that's a really, really strong point to keep in mind. There's several pros and cons, but you can check out the post that I'm going to link below for a full recap from someone that's way more experienced in the format than I am. Next up are 2 formats that I believe got their start on Magic Online. At least I know that Pauper did. And the 2 formats we're going to talk about are Pauper and Peasant. So the former was actually mentioned to me by my pal Zerlik, because he plays Pauper on Magic Online a lot. And he was going over with me what makes this format really interesting. And I thought it was cool enough it was actually what sort of was the catalyst for this video. So in Pauper, your entire deck can only be common cards, okay? So anytime a card is printed at common, it is eligible to be included in your deck. And I think that the challenge to this is we have some cards with static rarity from the starter sets. So, these cards aren't common, they're not uncommon or rare, but we know that there's no common cards that have dice, so we can presume perhaps that all the non-dice cards in a starter might be considered common, or we could say that those cards cannot be played unless they have a rarity in another set, meaning they were reprinted into the starter or the static rarity set. So, for example, we know that Defensive Stance was a common in Awakenings, and it was reprinted in the 2-player game. So, because it was printed as a common once, it's now a common in the Infinite format, essentially, right? Anyway, in both of these formats and in the next one, in both this format and the next one, I'm sorry, there can't be any character restrictions, despite them being rare or legendary. You simply build a typical 30-point team with plots and have a 30-card deck of only commons. The only thing being impacted here are just the cards you can include in your deck, and they have to be common, right? So they have to have the little blue symbol where the number is. Now, for Peasant, this is sort of a variant on Pauper, and it's essentially the same rules as Pauper, except you're also allowed to play some amount of uncommons. So in Magic's Peasant format, you're allowed to have 5 uncommon cards within your standard 60-card deck. Now, if we went with a similar format in Destiny, that percentage of cards would be between 2 and 3 uncommon cards. So if we went with the safety net and just said you can play 2 uncommon cards and 28 common cards, maybe that works. I don't know how impactful 2 common cards is going to be. We may have to say 4. That would be just over 10% of your deck. Not really. I think that would make actually a significant impact. When you're thinking about things like garbage chute and easy pickings, that's a huge advantage in a Peasant deck to have those 4 uncommons. So you could absolutely see these formats within the confines of Infinite or Standard or Trilogy. So you can do a little mix up with that. I think. I think Infinite would be the preferred way to do it to get people into it personally, which right now is exactly the same as Standard, and I think that just gives you a larger pool of commons. If you say I can only include commons from a set, you're really kind of cutting out about half of a set's. You're only talking about half of a set's cards, which in a very limited format like Trilogies right now could be not so great. So think about that, right? I think also there are some interesting variants that you can do to here this particular format as well. I think you could say something like maybe for Pauper or Peasant that you can only play non-unique characters, or perhaps you cannot play any legendary characters, right? Because the idea behind these formats and why they're named the way they are is to be able to get a cheap entry to play the game that basically anybody could do for, like, let's say under $20, right? Maybe even $10. You could also have a variant where you say, no cards at the time of the construction of this deck that are character-wise can be worth more than $10, or maybe you say you have a $15 pool of dollars to draw from, and that's all you can do. So, you might just, but that, at the end of the day, you have prices fluctuating up and down all the time. Maybe it's just better to have a rule like non-uniques only, no legendaries, something like that, one or both. So again, I think these formats are easy, they're cheap, they're good for the introductory player, and in fact, a store that has a lot of extra cards laying around could say, hey, we're gonna just do a Pauper Peasant tournament with the stuff we got in this box. Let's go and do that. Here's a stack of commons and do stuff. There's a lot of ways you could approach this, but again, the idea is just to be cheap and approachable. The very last format that I want to talk to you about is the Cube format, and Cube is a very abstract and a highly customizable format. And the reason for this is because it's actually a type of draft format, although you could also do it with sealed if you really wanted to. Another advantage of this over the conventional draft is price, okay? Cube drafting or cubing is inexpensive by comparison because generally a single person makes a cube and then everyone else drafts from that cube. So the cost is centralized just to one person. Everybody participating is just there to have fun, okay? So now you're like, well, what the heck is a cube, Gray? Because you use this word like 5 times just now. Well, a cube is a set of cards determined by the player who creates the cube for drafting. Someone could, for example, make a cube of just Awakenings cards. And in a cube, there are generally just one copy of every card from a set. Okay, so it's not 2 ofs everything in Awakenings, it's just 1. Okay, so another example is, well, then you're going to create card packs for the sealed or draft. Okay, so you're going to take 3 random commons, 1 uncommon, and then 1 random rare or legendary, and you're going to create these little 5 card packs, just like you would buy them. Okay, but they're going to be mixed set, and then you follow the standard draft rules or the standard sealed rules, whichever you decide to do. Right, draft is 6 packs, sealed is 8 packs. So cubes are, and of course you can incorporate the rival set into this as well, right? Just to make sure that you have actual characters. And cubes are really cool because you can make thematic cubes. Okay, you can make powerful card cubes. You can make block-based cubes. You can make archetype cubes, which are probably a little bit difficult right now. You can make color-based cubes, so an all-blue cube, an all-yellow cube. Or you can make a balanced cube and try to work towards creating something through playtesting that seems to work really well, regardless of how things are drafted, right? Again, that's difficult, limited card pool right now. But the best cubes out there are balanced in some way across the entire cube. And again, that can be so difficult to pull off. It's probably going to be difficult to pull off right now. But the Legacies block itself is shaping up to be quite a bit more balanced than the last block in general. So future cubes based on just the Legacies block might actually work pretty well. And the cool thing about the cube is you can also include, if you're doing a format-based cube, cards that you would not normally be able to draft. So you can put starter set cards right in the cube. You can put the 2-player game cards in the cube. You can put other future standalone product cards into the cube so that you see how they can actually play out in limited formats where you normally wouldn't be able to by normal limited format rules right now. Something to also keep in mind when building your cube is how many players it will support. You have to keep in mind that you're going to be making 5 card packs, and you're going to draft 6 packs per player in Destiny, which means that every 30 cards in the cube, and that's that 3 common, 1 rare, supports only 1 player. So in order to support 6 players, which is basically the minimum, you're going to need 180 cards. And the only set that is 180 cards is Legacies on its own. All the other sets are less. Awakenings is 174, and the other sets are 60. The 2-player game is like 45 cards, right? So what interests me about the 180 cards in Legacies is you got to wonder if they decided to do that on purpose or if it's just a coincidence. I really don't think it's a coincidence, though. I feel like that was designed with a 6-player draft in mind of 1 copy of each card or a 6-player cube in mind. And Jeremy's a seasoned vet when it comes to card games, so I would not be surprised if someone asked him that question and he said, yeah, that's actually why it's at the 180 cards. Anyway, I've been considering putting a cube together for my store just to have that different format available. So I'm going to be asking a few people around Discord. You might get a message from me about what they think is sort of a good start to a Destiny cube, and then perhaps through some play testing, we'll get it into a balanced state. And with the new set coming out, that'll obviously mix things up a bit. But you might think about doing the same as well and design a nice cube that perhaps might become the standard cube for a while. And there actually are some cubes out there in Magic the Gathering, and people say, hey, this is a really good cube. You should try it out. Let me know what you think. So if you could be the guy who creates the cube, the cube that everyone loves to play in Destiny, there's probably a lot of fame in that. Well, I'm impressed if you made it this far. I do hope you enjoyed this very brief overview by comparison on some things that you could be doing to help sustain your local community. I mean, that's a conversation that you could literally have for hours and hours with so many people out there, so many content creators, league organizers, tournament organizers out there. And what I would say in addition to everything else, because as we're talking this, we're talking about a dying community or a community that may be failing a little bit or it doesn't have as much interest. I'm sorry for using the word dying. I didn't mean that. And what you got to remember is never take what you have for granted, okay? Even though my local community right now is small, I know that there's a lot of players that are just sort of taking a break from it all, but I know that they're there somewhere. Either they're playing Legion or maybe they're just, they decided to use the game night to catch up on school or work or spend more time with their fiance or whatever, significant other. And I try to remember that because, that's really important to the future not only of the game, but my game, because you don't want to push too hard at your community or be that guy who's like, well, no one shows up and I'm not interested in playing anymore. Sometimes people are just on break, you know? And, you know, I always try to remember that. Don't take it for granted, because I don't want to push too hard. I don't want to be that guy, you know? But because I know that if no one's playing it locally because everyone decided to quit, then chances are I'm also done playing this game, because if there's no one to play with, why would I play it, right? And, you know, what also sparked this video, other than a conversation with my buddy about Pauper, is that too often lately I've been hearing about local communities that have been imploding or disappearing. And I think that's really, really sad, you know? Ultimately, not everyone wants to play on Tabletop Simulator, and the majority may not even be aware that it exists. You know, the game doesn't even have an officially supported online mode, you know, that goes as far as the physical product of this game. So, you know, once a player base dies in a given local area, then the game dies there forever sometimes, okay? In fact, there's a good chance that it just dies forever. You know, but if you can be the person who stops that from happening, or even helps mitigate some of the problem with interest in this game in your area by implementing maybe some of these suggestions or others that you can think of, that could go a very long way to helping grow your community significantly. Even one new player is a big deal, and if you get 2 per month, that can actually mean a lot over the course of a year. Alrighty, folks. So as I promised, I got 2 videos out to you this week. It wasn't easy, but things are winding down a little bit, as now that school's over. I actually had my last class today, and I came home and I was like, I'm going to do another video. I did one really early this morning. I wasn't happy with the editing. I put it up on Reddit. I got into some stupid argument with people. I don't know why. I took the thread down because it had a crappy name on the video. I didn't like it. I didn't like the editing. Overall, I wasn't happy with the finished product. But that's the problem with thinking to yourself, you got to push something out, you know, at 1 or 2 in the morning, when you really should just go to sleep and worry about it the next day. So that's my fault, and I apologize to anyone who kind of got involved in that conversation. It wasn't me, you know. It's hard to say exactly what I'm trying to say, because I haven't really given a lot of thought. This isn't even in the script. I just am saying this now because I felt like whatever. But as far as this topic goes, you know, I'm still waiting to see what's going on with everything else in real life, to see how much time I can start devoting to my local scene a bit more as far as growing it myself. You know, I think I'm going to be putting some effort in the meantime into building that cube. Okay. Again, I might wait till Way of the Force hits, but maybe not. You know, I feel like I'm in 2 minds about everything nowadays, and that kind of goes back to that wanting to get content out, even though knowing it's a little bit late and it's maybe not worth it. And going back on just some things that I don't generally like to do, like spoiler videos in general, you know. But I'm going to do a little personal video, I think, sometime during the week when I've gotten more of my thoughts together on this. And, you know, again, I'm a content creator on here, and I really enjoy doing this. I do it for, you know, fun. There's really no money in it. I get $10 on Patreon. But if you want to help me out a little bit more, you can always go to my Patreon, which is patreon.com/RebelGraySWD. You can subscribe to me on YouTube. You can drop me a comment. You can talk to me on Discord. All my information to reach those things is in the show notes. Every single video, they're in the show notes. So I'm always, you know, I'm a very readily accessible person. And until we get that next video out, remember to make that war not make one great. Okay? And neither does arguing with people on the internet. And may the Force be with you.